Happy Wednesday. Welcome to the briefing room, coming to you from the Washington Bureau of ABC News. I'm John Santucci alongside Catherine Falders. We are watching right now the stock market. Stocks not reacting well to news coming out of the Treasury. We've been trying to understand this. So basically, what's happening right now, and you see the numbers on your screen, the 10-year Treasury bond fell for the first time since 2007 below the 2-year Treasury bond yield. That is usually a sign that maybe, perhaps, we may be heading to some troubles in the economy. And of course, this all comes on the heels of the battles President Trump is having with Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. So first, to try to understand exactly what's happened in the markets, we're joined right now by David Wessel. He's a director at the Brookings Institute. And David, thanks so much for taking time this afternoon to speak to us. I want to begin with a topic I was going to ask you about anyway, but fortunately for us, the commander-in-chief just tweeted about it, and this is the yield curve. So here's what the president just tweeted, and let's start there. He writes, "We are winning big time against China. Companies and jobs are fleeing. Prices to us have not gone up, and in some cases have come down. China is not our problem, though Hong Kong is not helping. Our problem is with the Fed, raising too much and too fast, now too slow to cut. Spread is way too much as other countries say thank you, in all caps, to clueless Jay Powell and the Federal Reserve. Germany and many others are playing the game. Crazy inverted yield curve. We should easily be reaping big rewards and gains, but the Fed is holding us back. We will win again." All right, David, this is where we turn to you. Explain to us this yield curve. Explain why the president is pushing right now Jerome Powell to actually do something on this.
I'm going to try and explain what's going on the markets and the economy, but I'll take a pass on explaining what exactly Donald Trump means when he lets loose like this. Okay, so what is the yield curve? The yield curve is the relationship between short-term interest rates and long-term interest rates. Usually long-term interest rates like the 10-year or the 20-year are higher than short-term interest rates because people demand some reward for lending money for a long period of time. When the yield curve is inverted, that is when long-term interest rates are lower than short-term interest rates, that's usually seen as a bad sign. It's seen that the markets expect the Fed is going to have to cut interest rates a lot. And why would the Fed do that? Because the markets think the economy's in bad shape. And so the reason everybody's all exercised about this, the markets, which are sometimes right, sometimes get carried away, are suggesting that the economy is headed for trouble. The Fed is going to have to do what Donald Trump has been demanding, cut interest rates and cut them a lot. Now, the irony here is that the reason the markets think the economy is in bad shape is not because they think the Fed is screwing up. They think that Donald Trump is ruining the world economy with his trade policy and shaking up business people so much that they're reluctant to invest and soon will be reluctant to hire.
Well, and that's what I was just going to mention, because yesterday you saw how well the markets reacted to the announcement that the United States was going to delay those 10% tariff on Chinese goods as we head into the holiday season. The president announcing that before he went on his trip yesterday. But where exactly is the Fed at the moment? Because I just read your report up on Brookings with your colleagues. You write that 2 of the Fed governors are on board with working now on the YCC, and the 2 former chairmen of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke and Janet Yellen, have also supported this. Do we know where Jerome Powell stands at this moment in time?
All right. So I think there are 2 different things here, and we have to separate them. The current inversion of the yield curve the question is the market telling the Fed the economy is really in bad shape, or is the market saying we expect the Fed to cut interest rates and we're just getting there before the Fed actually announces? So that's the short-term question. Yield curve control, which does use the words yield curve, is something a little different. It's what happens when the economy gets really bad, the Fed cuts short-term interest rates to 0, as they did in 2008, and then what do? And what they might do is say, we've cut short-term interest rates to 0, and we're going to do, as the Japanese have done, we're not going to let long-term interest rates rise above some level, say 1%. But that's not really a relevant issue right now. The relevant issue now is, does Jay Powell look at the markets and look at the economy and say, wow, This is getting worse fast. Germany's had a lousy quarter. Their GDP is shrinking. The trade thing is really shaking up business, and
right.
We better get ahead of this thing and cut interest rates a lot, maybe half a percentage point at our next meeting. Or does Jay Powell say, the markets are carried away here. I feel like I'm looking at a hall of mirrors. I don't want the markets to tell me what my best judgment is about where the economy is going. After all, unemployment is still very low. Inflation, the latest reading is suggesting it's picking up a bit. And the latest survey I saw of economists from Bloomberg and Wall Street Journal and others say they put the odds of recession in the next 12 months at 1 in 3. It's higher than it was before, but the economists, who usually don't see these things coming, to be sure, are not yet saying that we're on the cusp of a recession. So it's a hard call for him to make, and the president makes it harder by all this shouting and tweeting.
And Catherine Folders, let me bring this over to you because we know the president is going to campaign on the economy. You heard what David said just there. 1/3 is now where we're looking in the next 12 months. In the next 12 months, the president's going to be very focused on his reelection effort, and that is going to torpedo that campaign pledge from if the economy does go down the tubes.
Exactly, and not only are you and I saying that, but a lot of people close to him have predicted that, you know, the outcome might be not what he wants if the economy tanks, and we know that he doesn't have a great relationship with Powell. He has called him clueless just on Twitter. And even you see former Fed chairs uniting behind Powell, saying these attacks aren't appropriate. But, John, they're not going to go away. I think the president and his advisors are very aware that the economy needs to be in good shape for him to win the election again.
And, David, lastly to you, just because I know people are obviously watching their 401ks, they're watching the stock market today. When is the next meeting of the Federal Reserve that something could happen?
Well, the next meeting is in September. But can I just make a point here? Look,
please.
The president has been trying to say if the economy falls apart, it's the Fed's fault. But I think what's happened to him, unfortunately for him, is all this tariff stuff and trade stuff is stepping on that story. So people are going to say the economy was doing okay, and the Fed did a little bit to try and help it, and then you screwed it up with all this tariff saber rattling. So I think the reason he's getting a little bit agitated is his idea that he can tell voters it's the Fed's fault, not mine, is now under question.
Is now going kaput because of everything going on with tariffs. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. David Wessel over at the Brookings Institute, thank you very much, sir. We appreciate it. We're going to have much more on where the stock market is going and the economic output tonight on World News with David Muir. We are going to switch gears, though, now in the briefing room because we have been following what is going on with immigration. The announcement that came from the president's acting director on immigration reform, Ken Cuccinelli, earlier this week, still having major ramifications. I want to bring in ABC's Quinn Owen, who's been watching this one for us. Okay, so the announcement from Cuccinelli, we saw him in the briefing room. Rare to actually see that room activated for once, but that's a whole nother story. Earlier this week is that the federal government is going to be changing some of the public programs that are available to people coming to this country. What programs are those?
So what they're going to be changing is the programs that immigrants might potentially apply for in order to secure public benefits like Medicaid and food stamps, right? So they've expanded the list of programs that could be used to deny your application for legal permanent residency. These are people who are living in the country, many of them legally, or people who might come in the future who then could be looking to apply to Medicaid or food stamps primarily. There's a few other supplemental income programs as well. But if the government does determine that they might use these kinds of programs, they can be not denied their application for permanent residency in the U.S.
And you know, you and the team here have been following everything that's going on the immigration front every day. I mean, besides what's happening on the border, but these changes now to people trying to gain legal citizenship. What are you hearing from the different interest groups that are paying attention to these? What's their biggest concern at the moment for these individuals?
So immigrant advocates are very concerned, and we've already seen lawsuits start about this rule because there's a group of about 23 million people who are either non-citizens themselves or who live in mixed households that might feel incentivized to unenroll from these programs, these food stamps programs, Medicaid programs, if they feel like their application for citizenship or legal permanent residency might be impacted. So a lot of concern about the confusion that this might cause in immigrant communities, and what it will prompt people to do could mean that it has impact on U.S. citizen children that live in these mixed households.
And And on that note of confusion, you know, I actually was confused earlier when you and I were talking about this. How does this affect green card holders right now?
Green card holders are not impacted by this if they're planning to stay in the country. This rule also doesn't impact refugees or asylum seekers.
But if I'm a green card holder and I leave and I want to come back,
that's where it gets more complicated. And especially if you're planning to leave for more than 6 months, that's when you probably should get an immigration lawyer and hash out the specifics.
Quinn Owen and our team watching that. You can read all of Quinn's great reporting up online at abcnews.com right now. But we're going to stay on this topic because really, as we've mentioned, these are programs, Quinn just laid them out for you there, that help people coming to this country. My own family used them many, many years ago. And the benefits they provide are so, so important. Let's bring in two guests right now that can speak very well to this. We're joined right now by Angela Sutherland and Evelyn Roosley. They are co-founders of Yumi. This is an organic baby food company based on the West Coast. They've been on some of our ABC programs over the last little bit. Ladies, thank you very much for taking time this afternoon to speak to us on this important topic. We appreciate it. Let me begin with you, Angela, because the story we understand is that your mom actually came to the United States as a refugee from Vietnam with only $50 in her pocket. And some of the programs Quinn was talking about are the reason that she was able to survive and provide a great life for you.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, my mom really lived the American dream. So she came here with like $50 in her pocket, and she then went on to fall in love with my dad and create a company that employed, tens of thousands of people. And so I think, without the need of without the aid of public aid and sort of that federal assistance, I don't think she'd ever be able to make that. I mean, she came here with taking care of her younger brother, who was only 15 at the time, and really just worked to make that happen, get him in school, and then eventually, again, created a company that employed people. And so I think for us, for me and my family, it was a huge thing in our lives.
And Evelyn, your story quite similar with your family coming from Indonesia.
Yeah, my parents came here in the 70s to California, and my dad actually had to drop out of school when he was in Indonesia. He took a job on a cruise ship, and he happened to meet a family from California who were so taken by his story that they wanted to help him. So the community really kind of rallied, and it allowed him to get his education in the United States. He eventually got his PhD in Iowa. And it's why I'm here, and why, in part, all these ripple effects lead to why we're here and why we're also now an employer and have a business in California. So very much the product of immigrant families.
And talk a little bit, your product, as I mentioned, you do provide organic baby food. Quinn was mentioning food stamps would be affected. We know many people immigrate to this country with children, sometimes young children. Those are nourishments that children obviously need, and if they don't have access to them, I'm curious, just in your line of work, what's been some of the things you're hearing from people as they're concerned about trying to get some of these benefits?
Yeah, so absolutely. So one of the things that compelled us to start this company was the importance of nutrition in the first 1,000 days of life, and that access to adequate nutrition can really change the trajectory of a child's experience in life. And so whether that's neural development or physical development, getting the right nutrition really matters. And recently we heard over, I think it's 80% of under the age of 2 are using some sort of assistance, whether it's the WIC program or other financial aid.
Yeah, so I think it's just really important when you think about the resources that a family depends on, especially kind of earlier in their cycle when they're raising young kids. It is so important to get access to that nutrition and make sure that they can flourish, as not just as adults, who are trying to become great contributors to society, but also the next generation that they're bringing up.
Yeah, absolutely.
Angela Sutherland and Evelyn Roosley, thank you so much for taking the time this afternoon. And as I mentioned, these are programs that help families like yours. You're able to provide jobs now to so many people, and it's going to be questioning to see what happens here with the Trump administration. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. We're going to switch on to another topic now. So we've been following what's going on with this White House and the gun debate. We know that the Senate did not come back from a recess. The House did not come back from a recess. But apparently, according to President Trump, this is going to be a top agenda item when everybody comes back in the next couple of weeks after those two mass shootings happened just a little over a week ago in Texas and Ohio. Let me bring Catherine Catherine Falders back in for this conversation. And Catherine, you and I have been tracking what's going on over at the White House right now. The president in the middle of his 10-day vacation up in Bedminster, New Jersey at the moment. But our understanding is that there have been conversations going on right now and meetings between the campaign and members of Congress about getting something going.
Yeah, so the White House staffers have been having conversations with, a bipartisan group on Capitol Hill. And it's not only those on Capitol Hill, it's the campaign as well. And as you and I have been reporting out, they've had some phone calls with the campaign, and there's been some suggestion that maybe the campaign could collect some data from the president's voter base to see how this is playing. But look, he hasn't made any decisions on next steps yet. He's expressed interest in some bipartisan bills, but there's a lot of factors, John, at play here, whether it's on the Hill, whether it's between the campaign in the White House, but he's also spoken multiple times with the NRA's Wayne LaPierre.
Yeah,
so,
and that's a question too, right? Because the NRA came out very early. I think it was 2016 when they endorsed him finally, but it was right before he had the nomination, something like that. My brain's died 4 years ago after covering the campaign. But the fact that there could be now separations between the NRA and the Trump White House, quite stunning to think where that close relationship once was.
Yeah, and I think the president also thinks he has to walk a fine line with that relationship. He wants to have a close relationship with the NRA, one of the most powerful lobbying groups, but at the same time, I think he's open to other things that the NRA isn't, whether it's background checks, and there really is also concern separately from that, but about how this will impact 2020.
Yeah, we're going to be watching that. Catherine, stay with me for this next story, because we've been also following President Trump's words. We know what were some of the language that was used by the shooter down in Texas when he shot and killed so many people at that mall on an early Saturday morning. But we actually went through and dug at some of the cases right now that are on federal dockets and others across this country, and we identified 36 cases where the president's name and his language are used in criminal cases that have a connection with violence or assault allegations. We're joined right now by ABC's Mike Levine. He reported this story. So, Mike, you spent a lot of time on this, I know, because you work next door to me, going through all of the cases here that we're trying to track. And you found so many examples where defendants are invoking Donald Trump's name.
Yeah, we found, like you said, 36 cases. The president says that his rhetoric brings people together, but we wanted to see what court records and police reports say. We found 9 cases where an actual act of violence, someone mentioned Trump's name either right in the middle of the act or right afterward to police. We found 10 cases where threats and taunts, where the person doing that actually named the president. And then we found another 10 cases where once a legal case was brought, lawyers, defense attorneys tried to use Trump's rhetoric to explain their own defendants' actions.
And Mike, as I said, I've read your story, and for those interested in it, it's fascinating. You need to go online to abcnews.com right now and read Mike's reporting. But one example you use, Mike, is a case from 2016, April. This is before Donald Trump is president, obviously, but he is the rising Republican candidate at that point, pretty close to securing the nomination. And the case you mentioned is involving a 61-year-old John Martin Roos. He's from Oregon. And what we saw in that case, as you well know, is that Roos posted at least 34 messages to Twitter about Trump. Talk to me about what the Department of Justice is doing right now. Are they, as we see this rise in mass shootings, people committing violence, are they actually focusing in on when people are invoking the president or his rhetoric on social media, trying to identify people like Roos before they strike?
Of course, privately, they're looking at whatever they can find in terms of indicators, red flags for that might indicate some sort of action from someone. The Justice Department, though, has also been very public recently about the threat of domestic terrorism and white supremacy. They have openly asked the public for help in this, which is something new. We didn't really see that from the Justice Department and the FBI a few years ago. They have issued press releases, again, begging the public for help.
Mike Levine, always on this case for us. Thank you, sir. You can read Mike's great reporting right now at abcnews.com. Catherine, just quickly to bring you in on this, because we've both covered the president for too long, going back to 2015 and 16 for us. But this language and this dialogue, the president has repeatedly said that he does not influence these people, but yet his words are being latched onto.
Yeah, he's constantly said it. And John, we've even heard him say that he thinks that he should dial back some of this rhetoric a little bit, but he feels that he's under attack and wants to fight back. But that's right. I mean, you've seen that even recently with the 4 Democratic congresswomen. And he says that when they had that chant at the rally, that wasn't because of him, that they weren't saying his words, but it was. The sentiment was there.
And in that case, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has had to actually get Capitol Hill Police involved to secure for those women's safety.
Yes. On Capitol Hill, you can see when they're walking around, they have a Capitol Police officer in tow. And now, whether I remember we were asking them about this, whether it's been a threat to their lives specifically, and if anybody has sent them messages, we are not quite sure about that. But the reality is that they do need increased security because of the chant and because of his supporters are saying the things that he's saying and that he's fueling.
Now, the president is going to be back on the campaign trail tomorrow. We're going to see him up in New Hampshire. Do we expect, Catherine, I mean, I'm asking a stupid question as it's coming out of my mouth, but here it goes. Do we think that the president recognizes that his words need to be a little carefuler in some of these respects?
I think...
Have aides said it to him?
I think you and I have both heard that some aides have told him to tone it down in a way, and I think he's admitted at some points, whether it was a year ago or a few months ago, that maybe he could possibly tone it down. But in this case, while he says he denounces some of those chants by his supporters, he's not in that case. He wasn't actively trying to stop them. So I think it's two-pronged in a way. Does he think that he's wrong saying this? No. He doesn't, and I think some of his aides, and it depends what example we use, as you know, but some of his aides may think it will help him. With the white nationalist example, though, we do know, you and I both know, that the president is very angry about that, and he doesn't want to be called that. So, but regardless, will it change? Will these attacks change? Your guess is as good as mine.
It's totally, and I mean, the president will, as we both know, do his own thing, as we've seen time and time again. But it is interesting, just looking at where we're going into the fall. This is going to be one of those rare rallies where we've seen him up in New Hampshire. There has been speculation, just to do a little bit of 2020 with you for a second, that perhaps tomorrow we could see a new Senate candidate enter the race. There's been conversations that Donald Trump's first campaign manager, Corey Lewandowski, could enter the race. What do we know right now?
Yeah, so you and I both know that Corey Lewandowski will be there at the rally with him tomorrow in New Hampshire, his home state, Corey's home state. And look, Lewandowski was tweeting yesterday about new polling that he could do well in the state. The president hasn't come out and endorsed him yet, but we know that he's had conversations with him about it, and he's heavily weighing it. Now, the timing of it is still a little unclear, but look, the rumors have been floating about this. He's said on the record to us that he's strongly considering it, so tomorrow seems like a good time to announce. But you know how this goes.
Of course.
The president may say, "Oh, I heard you were running," and bring him up on stage as he's done before. So nothing planned right now.
But now, and the other thing that's interesting here with this president is that knowing how he's learned more on the job, he knows he needs more supporters, more allies up on Capitol Hill. We're starting to see potentially some change in the 2020 regime, potentially some of the 2020 Democratic contenders potentially leaving the presidential race and running for Senate. We've been hearing things maybe about Beto O'Rourke down in Texas or John Hickenlooper out in Colorado. The Trump team knows that in order to actually have a successful 2020 in their mind, it can't just be about Donald Trump. It needs to be about these other candidates he brings on board.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point that you make, because I think that the campaign and a lot of the folks working over there in their political operation realize that. Maybe they think that they should have a stronger ground game predicting that at first. But that's a huge thing. It's not just Donald Trump versus the Democratic candidates. It's those who are running for Senate, who are out in the field. So they realize that that's going to be a big challenge for them, and they're planning that out.
All right, Catherine Falders keeping an eye on all of this for us. Thank you, Catherine. Another story that we are watching, and it involves the 2020 field, is what's going on in Newark, New Jersey right now. There is a water crisis up there, and it involves the former mayor of Newark, Cory Booker, who happens to be running for the White House. We are joined right now on the phone by Karen Yee. She is a reporter with the Newark Star-Ledger. Karen, thank you for taking the time this afternoon to join us. I know you've been working on this story for the last several years. So walk me through, if you can, because the headline on your site right now at the moment is that filtered water that was been brought into Newark apparently had 4 times the level of lead. What is going on right now?
That's correct. So what's alarming people at the state and federal level is that these filters, which are supposed to be a short-term solution to the lead in the water, don't appear to be working in 2 of 3 tested homes. So the problem is we have a really small sample size, but from the results that we've seen, they're surprising results, because generally these filters are supposed to absorb the lead so that when you run your faucet, it runs through the filter, absorbs the lead, and comes out clean. And that's not happening in at least 2 homes.
Now, so Cory Booker is out tweeting today, Karen, that the federal government needs to step in, needs to do something. But there have also been questions raised about what Cory Booker did and did not do during his time as mayor of Newark.
Right. So Booker, to be clear, had left the city in 2013, and the lead levels in Newark spiked in 2017. So there were some issues with lead in the schools about April 2016. So Booker was no longer mayor here when the city's water started to have this high level of the contaminant in it.
And Karen, what do we know right now as far as the federal government's concerned? Are the officials there going to get their way? Are they going to get more support from the federal government? What are you hearing from the 2 U.S. senators from New Jersey's offices?
The EPA has not yet responded to calls from Governor Murphy, calls from the Commissioner of Environmental Protection to step up and to help pay for the bottled water distribution. The state has put up about 70,000 cases of bottled water so far, and the governor today said, you know, the EPA and the federal government has to punch up their weight and has to really step up here.
All right, Karen Yee with the Newark Star-Ledger. Thank you, Karen. We appreciate it. We'll have more on this story tonight on ABC's World News with David Muir. That is going to do it for us in the briefing room. I'm John Santucci. Thanks so much for joining us. You're watching ABC News.